Hello, everybody. We are very excited to welcome everyone to the first in our 2024 series of the Momcology Caregiver Lounge. We are very excited to welcome all of you here tonight in your personal step forward in your journey to self-care. I'm Kat. I'm a member of the Momcology team. My co-host tonight will be Layla Zangel, also with Momcology, and Greg Hedler, who is a licensed clinical social worker at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Greg has worked in the pediatric oncology space for over 20 years. He holds a deep passion for his work, both with families and also his work through Momcology. Greg is particularly driven by the concept of empowerment and inviting people to discover their best selves. He is here tonight to help us explore our relationships with boundaries and how to learn boundary building to support healthy and fulfilling relationships. I will quickly turn the floor over to Greg. Greg, if you have anything else you'd like to add, I welcome you to do so, and I will take myself off camera.
Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you, everybody, for showing up for yourselves tonight. It is an exciting opportunity for us to gather and to talk about this idea of boundaries. I have been working with our Momcology team here in creating this content, and as we continue to develop it, it just became more and more exciting to be able to spend our time tonight over the next hour or so thinking about and talking about this concept of boundaries. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So, how to hold healthy boundaries. This idea, healthy boundaries, is something that I believe we've been practicing or playing with for the majority of our life. If we knew it, if we didn't. And the intention of tonight is to really be clear in when you're looking to set boundaries. What is it that you're doing? Why are you doing it? And how can you do it even better? As we begin our journey, I want to, one, welcome you again, and two, to really take a moment and honor the teachers that have given me the ability to share this content with you. So just as much as I bring it to you, I sought it for myself, because boundaries is this concept that's not just for some of us, it's all of us. And so I knew that I needed to do some work around this idea of boundaries. And so I sought it, and I found the Connection Institute. And so I was able to study with Faye Watt and Abby Rogers. And I want to give acknowledgement to them for the learning and appreciating them. It's like part of my practice is that the teachers that have given me the ability, I want to give a moment of acknowledgement to them. They've allowed me to be here with all of you. So when we think about boundaries, I want to zoom us into the space of asking this really poignant question of, who am I at my best? When we think about who we are in this sense of best self, that is where we begin to build the boundaries backwards from. What is the end in mind? Where is it that I want to be? What is that idealized or best self that I think about? And if I start from there, I begin thinking about, how do I build that pathway to my best? And some of that building may include creating really good boundaries for ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. Polls are anonymous, and it gives us a sense of some of your thoughts as we set up for this tonight. And so this first poll is asking for you to describe who you are at your best. On your best day, fully caffeinated, wearing your best outfit, really good sleep, whatever the best is for you. Those are some ideas. Those are definitely not all of the ideas. Sometimes if I get 3 hours of sleep, that might be my best, right? So giving a sense, taking a moment here and identifying, who are you at your best? We have some answers coming in. Thank you so much for those who are answering, giving a sense of this. I love this opportunity to connect with you, as it gives us a sense of realness, like working with you on this concept right now. As Kat had shared, the idea of being empowered and investing in yourself is really a key concept of mine. And so I really want to make this webinar personal to you. So thanks for sharing some of these answers here. We'll give ourselves a little bit more time, and then I'll go ahead and end the poll and see what we have. Just one more moment here. And if you didn't get to answer, there's other polls that are going to come later on, so don't you worry. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll, and let's see some of these answers that we came up with. I'm realizing, Kat, Layla, that I'm unable to see the answers to these. I'm wondering if either of you are able
I
to see
will,
those answers. Thank you.
yeah, I will. Would you like me to read some off for you?
Yeah, please. Thank you so much.
Sure. So answers that we have, describe who you are at your best. We have creative, positive being. We have calm, patient, go with the flow, and positive. Focused, mindful, at peace. At my best, I'm able to be a good teacher for my students and take care of myself. A walk, some healthy food. I'm a caring family member and friend. I am patient, kind, fun, and loving. Starting with a good night's sleep, which I rarely get.
Mhm,
Relatable.
mhm. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all that, Layla. And thank you, everybody that was offering some ideas there. That's exactly what I was thinking about. So, me at my best is creative. And if that's my best, then how do I start building backwards from there? If I want to ensure that I show up in a creative space, what do I need to do to preserve that creativity, to make sure that it's a part of my life in some way, shape, or form? If that good night's sleep is something that is you at your best, then considering what routines, what ways in which can I begin building myself backwards from that space? And what do I need to create boundaries around? What needs to support me at my best? So, whether you offered an answer or not, continue to think about what is this? Who am I at my best self? What does that actually look like in some way? I really vibe with that idea of creativity. Being able to design this content, being able to, find ways in which to be creative in my theatrical space is all things that feel really important to me, and they all require me to create a boundary to ensure that that actually gets met in some way. If I know that's who I am at my best, recognize the given realities of our life, and still want to seek the best within it. And the ability to do that is through boundaries. So think about that question. No need to answer, just something to think about. Given your present realities, what, if anything, would need to begin to shift in order to ensure that you still continue to show up as your best self? So, in order to do so, here's our magic word for the evening, this idea of boundaries. And how do I go about creating that space, that time for me to create boundaries? So I'm going to go ahead and ask Layla to launch the next poll in terms of me, not me at my best, but when I say boundaries, what word comes up for you? This is another opportunity for us to get some level of this. Thank you so much. So when I say the word boundary, what are some other words? We'll give ourselves about 30 seconds here just to get a sense and flavor. That word boundaries could spark something within you. It may prove to be exciting. It may be something that feels challenging. You have maybe a word that you may think about. Maybe there's even a visual that when I say boundary, something visual shows up for you. Let's see, Layla, if we can get to about 12 again, 12 responses, and then we can go ahead and end the poll and let's see what we come up with. Thank you so much for the support.
All
Wonderful.
right. So some words that come up when I hear boundary are, let me take a look. Protecting my peace, a tool, stopping, distance, setting limits, expectations, protections, personal
Mhm.
space, personal time, what I accept for myself, saying no, being taken advantage of, being able to say no, scary, saying no when I need to, even if it feels uncomfortable, limits, knowing that it's okay to say no.
I had a feeling, thank you, Layla, and thank you, everybody that shared. I had a feeling that that word no was going to come up when boundaries were talked about there. And so sometimes our boundaries, it does sound like a no. that does set that boundary for us. No, I'm not going to do that. No, do the laundry yourself, whatever it is, right? Your no is heard in that way, and it is setting a boundary. What I'd like to do today is expand upon that there are other things to consider as well, not only in how we say no, but it's how we make asks of one another. Asks, A-S-K. How do we make asks of one another so that we can ensure the thing that we want gets met in that way? So yes, no's are one part of boundaries, and we can expand even further around that. So when I think about boundaries, what I'm going to think about here is they are tools to keep out what is not wanted. And at the same time, it holds and invites us to hold on to what we do want. So good boundaries, and this is why an expansion on no happens here, is that a no may keep out what it is that you don't want, which is one half of this. When I now begin to think about boundaries, it is both the no, and it is also claiming what it is that I do want. What is it that I do want to make sure I get? And so this duality of boundaries is part of the work that we get to do, is recognizing what don't I want and what do I want right now. One of the things that I think about in terms of this, oh, cute little puppy. And I think of this in terms of if this was a newly adopted puppy into your home, and you wanted to let that puppy outside, you would want to make sure there was a fence, some sort of boundary that was going to keep that puppy safe. So boundaries for me become that idea of how do I protect my best that we talked about earlier? How do I protect what's important to me? It may be time, it may be mental health, it may be well-being, it may be time with your family, it may be work. Whatever that is that's important to you, you're beginning to claim that as important by placing some sort of boundary around it. There are some of us like myself that work remotely, and I recognize that sometimes when we're working remotely, our boundary around work begins to fade. And the thing that I bring up with people is to then identify, well, what's important to you? How do you want your work and family life to look, whatever that is for you? And we begin thinking about what is the important thing we want to hold on to. And we begin building that boundary around it. Because you don't want to lose that cute puppy you just adopted. We want to make sure that it stays safe. So boundaries both keep things out, but also protect what is important. And I heard one of our momcologists name that too, and saying that, like, yeah, boundaries are about protection. And I think that's a really great understanding of it as well. The empowerment part of this is that boundaries are an opportunity for us to choose, that we have a choice that's involved in this. So one of the things that I come back to, and maybe some of you have heard me say this before because it's something that really connected to when I was working directly with patients and families at the hospital, that right away, something that I would name for us was that I am somebody that you can practice your no with. You can choose to see me, or you can say, nope, not today, Greg. And I will actually celebrate your no. I'll celebrate that boundary you set because I want to say, thank you for knowing what you need now and what's important to you. And maybe not seeing me is the thing that you really want to do right now. And that's okay. Because we recognize that at the hospital, there's little that we get to choose. And so I wanted to remind people that you can practice your boundary with me. You can say no, and you can practice that choice, and I'm going to celebrate it, and I'll come back tomorrow and check in on you. So this idea that boundaries are something that we get to choose is something else that I want to put onto the table for us, is that what choice am I wanting to make right now? What choice is going to keep me safe, or what's important to me safe at the same time? There's that empowerment model that Kat named earlier that I really feel connected to. And lastly here, and usually it's there for you as well, is to say that when I think about boundaries, it's an agreement that I am making with myself first. What is it? Get clear. What feels best to me? And then the next part of this is to enroll the other person in supporting you in that boundary. And the process of enrollment is for you to say to somebody, you know what, this is what's important to me. This is what's really valuable. This is what I'm struggling with right now. And I'm going to need this boundary to keep out what I'm not able to hold right now and to keep in what feels most viable to me, what I want to put my attention. And that's the key to enrolling people in my mind. Sometimes a no doesn't necessarily enroll people. It somewhat pushes people away and a boundary set, but it doesn't also give a people sense of what's happening for you right now. And I want to name that we don't always have all the words to set boundaries in this way. And this may be an idealized space to stretch from. And at the same time, I want to give it to you because you begin thinking maybe about boundaries a little bit differently as well. This process of enrollment to me is one of the things that I practice often in everyday things, such as like if somebody asks me to drive and I'm really not feeling up for it that day, maybe I negotiate and I enroll people in what I would like and the boundary around me setting that idea of like, I prefer not to drive. This is why, and this is what I'm thinking. And I begin enrolling people in this way. So again, boundaries start with a no and can be expanded upon in determining what we want and what we want to protect. And keeping that in mind, we then enroll others in that same process. We want to keep that golden retriever safe. Staying with this analogy, I want to offer another aspect to this. And so this came up for me in my own learning when I was a student in this and was thinking a lot about it, still a student in it. And I kept visualizing this idea of a fence. And this, what you see in front of you here, identifies two things. You see the house, and the house is fairly far away from the fence. This is a buffer space. This enables us to say, I want to set a boundary far enough away from what's important to me in this space, the house, in order to create some level of space between it so that when I set that boundary, it's not right up against the house in this way. Because when I cross that boundary, and sometimes boundaries are permeable, and sometimes we can't always hold them as well as we want. And so sometimes they're crossed. And what I want is that there's space between the boundary and what's most important to me right now. And so when I think about this, I would think of it in terms of my limit. What is the last thing that I can't, straw that breaks the camel's back? That's a limit. And the boundary is that fence that I want to set far enough away so that if it's crossed, it's not up against my limit. It's not going to be that straw that's going to be the last thing that I need to hear, to experience before I may feel a sense of upset. And it's far enough away in that way. A small example of this is, and I know I use examples with my family often. And so in thinking about a conversation I was having with my mom, and her and I had been on the phone for quite some time. My stepdad was also on the call here, and we were talking about some family stuff that had been happening amongst my siblings and all this. And all of a sudden, right, I'm recognizing I'm coming up to my limit. My limit was approaching. Like I felt it. It was like, oh, wait, I can't stay on this call much longer. Like I am really reaching my limit. So when I noticed that my limit was coming in sight, I said, oh, I need to name this. So then I quickly said to my parents, I said, I want to make something known. I said, I have about 3 more minutes in the conversation, and then I'm realizing that I'm saturated. I'm no longer able to really hold as much attention as I want for the conversation, and I'm going to have to step away. And so I set the boundary, not at the moment that I was at my limit, but a little bit ahead so that there was buffer space. And as the conversation arrived and I got to the 3-minute mark and kind of watching for it, right? And I was like, okay, so I'm going to pause and appreciate the conversation. I've gotten to my 3 minutes and I'm going to need to step away. My mom wanted to keep going, right? And I saw it and I heard it and how she was continuing to bring up more content. And I was like, okay, right? And so the boundary had been crossed a little bit and I had a little bit more buffer space there. And then my stepdad stepped in, it's funny, and said, Karen, my mom, Greg is saturated, as he said, and would like to stop the call now. And so he helped to affirm the boundary that I set. So that's maybe not a high risk example of how we create boundary, and may it give you some sense of the fact that we want to set boundary further away from us, our limit, before it's right up against the house. And I think how we design fences and homes is one of these ways we can think about that space between, and I want to make sure I get, so that if at the time it's crossed, it's not right up against that, what's most important to me. Excuse me. One of the things that I consider within our community here is potentially, having worked with several families, is that moment of diagnosis, and that many people may be reaching out to you and may be asking questions about what's going on and what's next. And they may constantly be asking out of a sense of care. However, you might have a limit to how much you're able to share or how much you're able to talk to people and socialize in this moment, when really what feels important to you is, I'm closing my eyes, I'm touching my heart in the sense of like, I need to back away. I need a moment for me, my family, that allows for me to have that space, right? And so this could be something to consider as well, as how much can you share or how much do you want to share? And what is the boundary that you want to set for yourself in terms of communication that may give you some space so that it's not up against where you can't, you just all of a sudden you explode at the next person that asks you, so how are you? Right? That there's some space there. Amazing things like Caring Bridge and other sites like that give people sort of a space to go, and that's a boundary that could be set in this way. So thinking about that, consider for yourself, where's my limit? That's knowing yourself. And where's the boundary that I want to set so that it's far enough away so that the moment it's crossed, I'll still be okay. And then I reset my boundary. So there's some reality that is also present, which is that boundaries are hard. It's hard to hold a boundary. It's hard to build that fence. And I want to recognize that, and that it's not simply idealized in my mind, but it's work. It is something that takes effort on my part. I got to know myself. I got to know my limit. I got to know myself at my best. When am I going to set this boundary? Oh, I don't, just whatever. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to see how it turns out. Boundaries can be hard. So I want to do one more poll with you today in our conversation here. And Layla, if I may ask for you to set off the one that says, what makes boundaries hard? And I'm going to visualize this for you as well. And there are some things that may make boundaries hard for us. And here's some examples of them that you see in front of you. And then a poll will pop up that will also let you know, where do you fall within this? So the idea of FOMO, if I say no to this, am I missing out on something really great? Oh, I should just go. I should just go. I don't want to miss out on this. Perfectionism. Well, I need to have the holiday look this way because that's how it always is, and I need to do this, and I need to tell everybody yes. I'm that person, right? Social conditioning. Are we permitted to set boundaries? Is that something we grew up in, or is that something that we're conditioned to not even have in some way? If I set a boundary, is I'm going to hurt that person's feelings if I set some sort of boundary here and you make it about the other person and you lose sight of you. And sometimes when you set a boundary, people can make you feel bad about it. And then you begin to learn, well, if I set a boundary, that person's going to come back at me. Who are you to say you don't want to talk to me right now? I care about you. I want to know what's going on. And you're made to feel bad because you set a boundary. And then some of us might be like, I don't even know, Greg. I'm here to learn what boundaries are. And that may be hard because I don't know what boundaries are. So I can't even set them. So looking at this, we have a lot of people concerning hurting someone else's feelings. I knew it. I feel you. I get you. I had a feeling that was going to be the highest vote that we had here. And there it is. At 19 people have identified of our group here tonight, 29 people in the room full. 19 of us say, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. And one of the things I want to offer to you in that hurting someone's feeling space is to go back to the idea of, have you enrolled them in the boundary enough? Or are they just getting your no? And that just then begins to make them feel something which may look like hurt. And is it the fact that they don't have enough information? Is there something that you're able to offer to them to let them know what's important to you and where you need to place that boundary so that it preserves some level of yourself, holding on to what's important to you, or you at your best? It's like if I wanted to be creative and I'm just hypothetically saying, like, if I wanted to paint, I'm not a painter, hypothetically, I wanted to paint that night. And then someone asked me to go out and to, go to a movie, or they were feeling really sad and they really wanted some companionship. And so they called, and I there was wanting to paint. That was really important to me that night. And if I set the boundary of no, that may hurt their feelings. However, if I begin describing where I was that night or what I was going to get out of the experience and let people into that space, does that allow for us to have a better conversation and to maybe work through some of the initial feelings of hurt? And I don't know, I feel like saying this too, is that like, and if we hurt some feelings sometimes and we look to kind of put that relational aspect in the bank, right? We've stocked it up already and a no might come and feelings might get hurt, yet perhaps we have that a relational exchange with each other, money in the bank to be able to have that no and allow those feelings to be there. Challenge question for us. I thank you so much for your vulnerability and sharing these. And certainly there may be other reasons why it's hard to hold boundaries. So working with that idea of like, oh, am I going to hurt someone's feelings right now? If I say no, what is it that I can let them know or share with them that may make that hurt feeling not so strong? And I want to tell you how to go about doing something like this. So we're going to talk about two different forms of boundaries here, two different ways in which we can show up in our boundary setting. And the first way is really this idea of proactive boundaries. And I think of these as structural. These are the guards at the gate in my mind. The bouncers that you put outside the door to make sure who's getting in is the right person that you want to get in. So proactive boundaries is a way in which we put up that fencing for protection and resourcing. Resourcing for me means that I have enough sleep, enough food, enough ways of enough support, and I'm fully resourced, and I want to do the things that are going to protect those. As I'm saying that out loud, right, I recognize that my boundary with work today, it wasn't good. On true confessions, I didn't place a boundary around eating. Like breakfast was very quick and on the go. It wasn't really a meal. Lunch, I was in the middle of something, so it was a yogurt, and like everything became unboundaried in this way. And I wasn't keeping what was important, and really was that giving me the most resource that I needed in order to show up as my best. I'll let you know that I have replenished and I feel resourced now. So I did set a boundary there. Yet it was also crossed a few times today. I recognize that proactive boundary, even though I set the time in my Outlook to say, this is when on my calendar I'm going to eat lunch, and I then surpassed that. There was an effort. It was an effort of a proactive boundary, yet I recognized I crossed it as well. There was a risk or there was a cost to that. Proactive boundaries are decided beforehand. Hypothetically, you might have a partner, you might have in-laws, and you're going to your mother-in-law's house or whoever, and beforehand, you're already proactively deciding, we're going to go in for 2 hours. That's what you have. I have 2 hours, and then I cannot be here anymore. I'm proactively setting this boundary, and I'm letting you know now. So proactive boundaries are decided beforehand. Before we're in the experience, I'm doing everything to create it otherwise. This coming weekend, I'm meeting a friend for brunch, and I proactively set the boundary that, I'm happy to meet you. The earliest I can meet you is 11:30, and then my time where I'm going to have to get home is 2:30. So I gave a window, and I already set it, and we already agreed to it before I even got into the experience, and kind of being like, oh my God, I want to leave at 2:30, but I never said it, and now here we are, and it's 2:45, and I just really want to get home, and it's Saturday, and I have things I want to do. I proactively set it. Started thinking ahead. What does future Greg need in order to be safe, to protect what's important? Proactive boundaries could be policy, like things that we think about even in the hospital, on the unit, and like there's policy in place. There's boundary that's there, right? You only can have 4 visitors. It's a boundary that's set for protective reasonings. It's a guard at the gate. And I want to name that these proactive boundaries, right? You might say, you know what, this weekend 2:30 is my cutoff, and then I might really be in the moment with them, and I might have some flexibility around my boundary a little bit. I might be gaining something from the experience that I don't want to leave yet, and so I might have flexibility. It's great to check in. How rigid or flexible is the proactive boundary I'm setting? If we stayed longer, would I be resentful? If it was okay to stay longer, what would that feel like? So these boundaries is an act of clarity, and then some movement possibly there as well. That last one, it can be communicated or not. So I am on the fence of communicating the boundary that I want to set, because I think that will make sure that that boundary is honored in some way. And some boundaries might be internalized. They might be something that you're watching for and you're waiting to say, like, oh, that's my boundary. That's where I'm no longer comfortable, or I don't want to have this conversation, or I don't want to be in this experience. And so you realize that you're thinking about the boundary before you go in, and maybe you didn't communicate it and you're finding it in real time. So proactive boundaries. It could be something that showed up for you as I talked about that may be this proactive space. And you're like, wow, I have proactive boundaries. These are the things I think about. This is when I go to bed at night. This is when I watch TV. This is when I read. This, you might have people that do have pets. I do not have pets, but people who do have pets that require going outside and walking. There's some boundary around the time in which that has to happen, because otherwise there's something at cost. And so those are boundaries that are proactively set. I walk the dog at 7, at 5, before we go to bed. All those are boundaries proactively set. This leads us to the other type of boundary I want to name tonight, which is responsive boundaries. This is a different, so the fence is that protective action in preparation, and then the guard can be the one that's happening in the moment. So this is when the bouncer now comes in and removes whatever the thing is that's happening in front of us. So I think of responsive boundaries as that ability that in the moment, just like I did in that example with my mom, that was a responsive boundary. I didn't go in thinking I only had an hour to talk about the things they want to talk about. I didn't even have a sense of time in which we were going to talk. Yet my responsive boundary was assessing me in the moment, recognizing I was at close to a limit. And then I said, you know what? I need to set a boundary now in the moment. Once I recognized it, how good am I at that? You might be thinking that proactive boundaries feel easier maybe. And I think responsive boundaries, you might be thinking like, those might be harder because that's in the moment. And like, do I have all the pieces? Did I know how it would feel? Can I think through all of this? And the more you practice, the more this becomes something that you can do. It can be more of that responsive in the moment way in which you're identifying this. This might be something, a responsive boundary, just like the example I also gave in terms of people telling me no when I came by their room or visited them in clinic. And so you might think of responsive boundaries as well in terms of some interactions that you have or ways in which you want to realize, you know what, this may be where I'm at. This is my limit for today. So moving on from here, I want to offer a few more ideas around the things that give us a sense of where boundaries fall. That responsive boundary that we're talking about, that sense of recognizing you might need to set a boundary in real time, what I can tell you is that there are certain feelings that we have that indicate, either a boundary needs to be set or a boundary was crossed, and I may need to be responsive to it right now. I may need to do something in this way. So we begin thinking and feeling in this way, and all of a sudden there's certain feelings that show up that tell us there's something in play. I might have crossed a boundary of my own that I didn't even know yet, and now I need to really go back and set that boundary again. You might be thinking of some of these feelings yourself right now. So behind door number 1, discomfort. If you're feeling any level of discomfort that's showing up for you, this may be an indication. You might be in an interaction, you might be feeling some level of discomfort. What that may indicate to you is like, is there a boundary that would benefit me right now? What is making me feel discomfort, and how can I readjust so that I can get back to feeling good to some level in some degree? Given the reality I'm in, is there something I can do to support my discomfort? That's a choice. Can I set it? And that's responsive boundary. You might then learn that this person or this situation makes you feel uncomfortable, and then you start setting proactive boundaries. The holidays just passed a little while ago. You might have relatives that make you feel uncomfortable. You might get proactive and ask the host to place you at a different table during the holidays or a seat further away from that uncle or aunt because you recognize the discomfort, and now you're setting a proactive boundary. Behind door number 2, the feeling I think about is resentment. If resentment shows up, there may have been a boundary that was crossed that you may now want to set for yourself. thinking about some low risk ideas around like somebody not following through on something they've asked or you asked, and you might feel resentment around that in some way. And did you set a clear enough boundary? Did you follow through and enroll them enough? And again, it's not just you, yet you're feeling the resentment, and it's an indication that something with boundary might help me here. Big one. And I know this is a big word. I've heard it a lot from many of you, from myself, is like, I might feel guilt. And guilt, I always say this, and those that I individually get to coach and guilt shows up, I quickly ask, like, well, what is guilt trying to teach you? Is there something there they're trying to teach you? And that part of that feels guilty. What's the message they want you to receive right now? And some guilt can help us understand where we want to set a new boundary, because maybe, you know what, I feel guilty that I didn't spend time with my family and I focused on work all night and I didn't get to say goodnight to my kids. Maybe that, hypothetically, that could be a place where a boundary might be set. Lastly, what I want to say is that certainly there's other feelings other than this that you might have as a clear indication of, whoa, a boundary. That's a feeling that indicates for me it's when crossed or it's needed in some way. So I offer you 3. You might have your own that you might want to put in there as well as an opportunity to think about. So when I think about this idea of boundaries, I want to offer and offer 2 more things before we shift to some question and answer from all of you based on all of what we shared today. I want to share 2 more tools with you that I want you to think about that indicate sort of where our boundaries fall. So I will move through this first tool called a desire scale. A desire scale is I happen to really, you might see my excitement. Once I learned about this, I began using this up against choices that I was going to have to make. So when we look at a desire scale, this might be a purchase we're going to make, something we're going to do, a person we're going to talk to, an activity we're going to take on. The desire scale lives in 2 areas. It's a heck yes. This is what, oh yeah, I'm all in. I want to go see that movie with you. I want to hang out. I want to do that thing. Heck yes. And there's also, heck no. I have nothing to go on that roller coaster. Heck no. Nope. My desire is 0. Okay, great. So if I know what I desire, what boundary am I going to need to create in order to either keep my heck yes or protect my heck no? So desire scale lives in these 2 continuums, right? Both ends. Now, what I want to share with you is that there are other responses, right? You're like, Greg, there's several other ways in which I respond to things. Do you want to go to the movies? Yeah, I'll go to the movies. Sure. When we're in this place, what we can call it is a place of receiving, right? Somebody's offering you something. You may not be a heck yes, but can I come over? Yeah, why not? So it's something that you're going to receive in the experience, yet it's great to know you're not a full heck yes. There might need to be some boundary, and you're in a receiving position here. Yeah, I'd like to try that. I'm sort of enrolled, right? Then you move into this next space, which is a giving space. Somebody asks you to do something. Can you pick up my kids after school tomorrow? Yeah, I don't mind picking up your kids. That means there's some cost involved. It's a giving opportunity here. And do you need to set a boundary around it? Because it could come at cost to you. So checking our response here, right? Yeah, that's not a problem for me. There's something there. It's in a giving. I'm taking away something from me. Am I okay with that? Or is this a time for a boundary? The next thing to this is if anytime I show up with a not really, or well, I'm curious if there's another day we could go out to brunch, or I'm curious how this could look, or maybe if those answers show up, to me, that's an indication of a pause, that I might need to negotiate a boundary because I'm not fully a yes and I'm sort of a no. So I'm going to pause. I'm not going to do anything right now. I'm not going to receive. I'm not going to give. I'm going to pause in place. Then I'm going to consider, is there a boundary that's required of me right now in order to make this better? And lastly, in the same tool of desire scales, is if you're a not now or no, I don't want to. This is a no action zone. Right? Some low risk examples. Do you want to watch this on Netflix? No, not right now. No, I don't want to. That is a place where there's no convincing. And I would recommend a no action moment there. And a boundary might sound something like, not now, perhaps tomorrow. And you begin to move that action into another place by creating that boundary and maybe identifying, protecting something important to you, like your time. And so then we get to our heck no. My face tells you that this becomes sort of a game to me. Like when people ask certain things and where I fall, even at work, when people ask me things and I recognize like I'm oh, no, I don't mind. And then I'm like, okay, what's it cost, Greg? What are you sacrificing? Okay, there are certain things I'm okay sacrificing. No, that's a boundary. I don't want to do that. Yeah, I'll give an example, but for time, I want to give you one more tool before we shift to some question and answer opportunity amongst all of us here. So desire scale. You can practice this as soon as after this call, when somebody in your home, somebody in your life that asks you something, like, where do I fall in this? Where do I want to set a boundary? The last item that I want to share with you right now, and there's so much here that I feel like we could just do weeks of support groups around boundaries and how you doing? How are you setting up your boundaries right now? Because this is revolutionary in a lot of ways for some of us to say and set these boundaries. I want to leave you with one last tool, and this tool is highlighting how you go about actually setting boundaries and placing your ask out there. And this is called, so how do you want your life to be different? How do you want to establish a new boundary? How would you like that to look? Here is one way in which you can do that, building your fences through what's called the ocean method. The ocean method. I'll briefly go through it and you can begin to get a sense of this, and I'll give you an example around this. So the ocean method, it's another one of those great acronyms that we put out there. And when I think about ocean, the first part of this is objective observation. So if I'm with you and I want to set a boundary, the first thing that I want to do is objectively recognize what's happening. I might talk to the time, I might talk to my energy level, I might talk to the situation. It's all facts, just the facts. There's no sort of objective, or there's no subjective experience on that part. It is all about the facts of life, right? Mrs. Garrett. So all about objective observation, just the facts, please. Once you are in that dialogue and you set up the facts of the moment, the situation, the what you found yourself in, you can then move in some places to a place of compassion, meaning that you're expressing empathy for the person that's asking the question, right? It might be, so I'm going back to that example of people wanting to know what's going on and asking you questions about it. And what you might do is to be able to say something along the lines of, I recognize that you want to know everything that's happening right now, and I really want to appreciate that. And it must be really hard not to know all the answers right now. I get it. It's hard for me too. So there might be a compassionate moment that happens as you're building up to setting this boundary or making this ask. In the next moment, you might now share the impact that you're experiencing, your humanness. Yeah, I know you want to know about what's going on with our family, what's going on with our child. And I am feeling really drained right now. This has been a shift in my life. This has been hard and heavy for us to experience. And we then begin to name the effect or the impact of the experience or the ask that's happening, or what's going on that needs a boundary around it. So I want to share my humanness. This is my part of it. I state the facts as they are, subjectively, not involved, all objectively. I then show compassion for the person and their ask or their want. I recognize it. I hear them in it. That compassionate moment brings you into dynamic and relationship. Once I'm in that dynamic, I now share my humanness, my own experience of what's going on right now with that person. And once I've shared my experience and I've done all that other work first, I now place my assertive ask out there. This is what I want. This is what's important to me. This is what I want to preserve. This is me at my best. And that's what I want to really take the time to really focus on. So I set the boundary. I make the ask of the other person. Not today, maybe tomorrow. However that sounds, I place the ask out there. The N in ocean is actually one that's not always on the table. That is a negative consequence that could come up here. It's stating like, well, if you didn't do all the things, you haven't heard anything I said, so now I'm going to put a negative consequence there. I hold it until it's necessary. So now to kind of drive my point home is that if you continue calling me every day, every other hour, you know what? I'm going to block you. That's a negative consequence. So there might be some negative consequence that you might need to offer to that person to clarify for them up front. This is the consequence we're playing with right now because I've done all the other work to try to set the boundary and you want to keep pushing beyond it. And I'm not going to hold that. I'm going to hold to my boundary. So I'm going to set that negative consequence. So low risk, super low risk example that I'm going to say right now. And I recognize that for learning. So I recently got a leased car, and with it came, as many cars do, Sirius XM radio. And I was in the middle of my workday, and Sirius XM called wanting to sell more time on their station to me, after my free trial. And I know, right, that they're after that. They want the win. They want the sell. And so I picked it up in the middle of the workday, and I began hearing this person kind of begin pitching all of this to me. So then I set the objective observation. You contacted me in the middle of my workday. I am really focused on some other items right now that need my attention, and I'm unable to have this conversation at this time. Then I moved into compassion. I recognize this is your livelihood and this is what you have to do, and how hard it must be to be hung up on and to constantly be asking for people to sign up and do this. I have compassion for that experience for you. What's happening is you're taking my attention away, the effect, the impact to what's important to me right now, which is my work. And that is really the thing that needs to be focused on in this moment, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to meet a deadline. So my ask is that we pause the conversation and you can call me at another time and I'm happy to listen a little bit more. And that is when I'll be able to speak more fully to you. Sirius XM Radio wanted nothing to do with what I just assertively set as my boundary. It's my practice space. So as they continue to push beyond it, even though I said and set again, I asked if we could have this conversation another time. I do not have, well, it'll only take a second of your time, Mr. Hedler. This is only going to take this much. So I place the negative consequence out there. If we continue this conversation at this time, my answer is fully no. We paused. We got off the phone because I placed the negative consequence out there. And you know what? They called the next day and they called the day after that. So assertive boundaries require us to reset them, plant that fence, do it again, do it again, do it again. So practice this ocean method, and I'm happy to be able to send all this out to the group that's present today, or however we'd look to distribute this. Happy to share this so that you can remember it and we can continue to practice. Last thing I'll say, our boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. It is why I set the boundary to begin with, because I invest and care about both of us, and both of us are worth the boundary. Thank you so much, everybody, for engaging in the conversation and to receive all of this tonight, for taking the time to sit back and receive the content and the conversation. And happy to take some questions, just the impact of what this was like to hear today. I'll stop sharing the screen and pop back to the lounge.
Thank you, Greg. That was so wonderful. I have to admit, I have been working with you on this for the last week or so, right? I've gotten the preview and I still think that it was fantastic and so useful and so much that we needed to hear tonight. So thank you so much. Even with the preview, I sat here in awe of what you had to share and how valuable it is to us. Thank you so much on behalf of Momcology and all the moms that are texting us, emailing us, putting things in the chat, and asking some questions. So
yeah, that would be wonderful. No, you are very welcome. This is incredible to share something that I clearly have passion around, and I think the better we get at boundaries, the better we get to experience our lives.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions that have been coming in a couple of different places, in the chat, in the Q&A. Some have been texted or emailed to us. So if you're up for it, I see some common themes. I'd love to jump in and see how you'd answer some of these. I feel like every question that has come in is so relatable. I could be asking them myself. But on behalf of our attendees tonight, how about this one? I struggle with boundaries. To avoid confrontation, I usually disappear or just stop communicating at all. What can I do to work on this issue?
Yeah, thank you for the question, first of all, and the bravery to name this for yourself. I think the idea of conflict and being in conflict with somebody, there's lots of us who are conflict avoidant. And so in doing so, I want to name what's really happening. So in those times in which we feel conflict avoidant and then don't answer phones and do everything to not set the boundary, right? What we're doing is actually controlling the relationship. That's the C on this side, is controlling the relationship. And really what we're moving further away from when we're in this control space, when we're not sharing our feelings or looking to avoid and not want to be in conflict, if I say this, we're looking to live in a space of controlling something or someone in that relationship. And it's not, I want to name this as not, it's not from a harsh place. It's not like I'm looking to control you and manipulate you. It's from a protective place for yourself. I don't want to get into an argument. I don't want to do this. And so you're doing everything to control the outcome. That's the control part. What you're moving further and further away from is this part over here, which is called relating. You're moving further out of relationship when we are not sharing the real feelings. Now, I want to name that's some risky business over on the relating side. This is allowing us to be honest and vulnerable and authentic with each other to a point that there could be some risk involved and it might feel uncomfortable and we might have to have an argument and I don't want to have an argument, so I'm going to go back to controlling. So recognizing sort of this dynamic kind of helps you to think, well, what am I looking to control? What feels safe to me? What am I looking to create as safety? And neither are bad. Like that's one thing I want to make sure you hear, everybody hears. It's like, this is not a bad thing. This is a recognizing behavior thing of what's going on. Because then once I know what I'm looking to be safe and protect around, then maybe I can be setting a boundary or engaging a little bit better maybe in this relationship in this way.
Such an important point you make that they're not bad things, right? We're working about safety. We're working about improving relationships, making things better, right? We're so tempted to think of boundary setting as harsh or something we feel guilty about. Or I'm seeing a couple questions throughout the threads that we're receiving here about, yeah, how to heal with that feeling guilty, right? How do we um, encourage, how do we enroll, to use your term, others um, when we're creating these boundaries, or more often communicating or trying to enforce those boundaries?
Yeah,
They might be
yeah.
easy for us to find in our own mind and know what they should be. It's the communicating and enforcing that feels hard and makes us feel guilty.
Right. Being in relationship is hard work. We are relational by nature as human beings. And so we're drawn to being in connection and community with people to whatever level that looks like for you. And so being in relationships are hard. Those of us that, yeah, I can just say that they're hard, period. I want to say that first. And secondly, it's like when I set these boundaries, because we're so relational by nature, we want to make sure we all kind of get along all the time. I might begin feeling guilty if I set a boundary. And I have placed this out there before in some dialogues, which I think is really important, is what's the function of the guilt? Is it a real function? Are you feeling bad about it? And is it serving a purpose? Is it letting you know like that you've done something that you don't want to repeat again? I think that's like guilt that's functional, is it lets us know like, oh, I don't want to, okay, that's something I don't want to do again. I've learned something from the guilt. And so therefore it's functional for me. And then sometimes we're feeling bad to sort of like beat up ourselves and think that what we want isn't worthy enough and we're not deserving of that boundary. And that's some of this internal work, like we call the calls coming from inside the house. This may be about us getting to a space that we're recognizing, I want to build this fence for me. I deserve to have this. And I'm not needing to feel guilty because I'm putting myself first, right? Right now, for this moment, this 30 seconds, whatever it is. So for me, and guilt is so big for me as well, right? It's about pulling that guilt apart and looking deeper beyond it, not simply accepting its face value of feeling bad, but looking more deeply at it itself.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
As we build those relationships, what do we do with those folks that maybe don't hear us setting the boundary, don't respect the negative consequence? Like when when they're just not listening. And if you get to that point of deciding that you just are not going to be in a relationship, you know,
Mm.
because of those boundaries consistently being ignored or trampled, right? How do you come to making that decision? And then how do you go about enforcing that even? Yeah, how do we create boundaries with those who aren't hearing it?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a sip because that's a spicy question.
That is a spicy one. Yep.
And so good. And because that's a lot of the time the reality. Because there's a lot of boundary violators out there because we aren't all good at holding boundary. We do a lot of sacrificing of boundary often in relationships. And so when we all of a sudden become we'll just call it enlightened in terms of setting healthy boundaries, and we go out there to set them, there may be a lot of people that reject this effort. They don't want the boundary. They don't feel like that it's needed. And so they're then actually disrespecting you in this way. And I'm get soft and compassionate around that, because just to think of anybody in our group feeling disrespected by somebody that is important to them and that they needed to create a boundary around, and even though they set the negative consequence, they're still not hearing it. So one of the things that I consider here is, what was the negative consequence you set? And did you hold yourself to completing that negative consequence? Like, did you follow through to actually get the point across? Or did you say, I'm going to set this negative consequence, but I don't follow through. So therefore, I'm not holding myself to my own boundary now, and it becomes a little sabotaging. And so then that person gets confused and they think, oh, no, I can keep steamrolling over your boundary because the negative consequence is just talk. And so now it's like us kind of meeting the rubber where the road meets, and holding and being brave and holding that boundary, and maybe needing to move away from certain people. I'm finding myself thinking of relationships in my own life that then separated me from people because the boundary was crossed, or I didn't feel like I was committed to that relationship in the same way. So
Right. And
this is work,
I
Layla.
really
I think
feel
this ties back.
compelled. I
Oh,
feel compelled to chime in here, guys. I was trying to let you
Yeah.
two just keep going, but this is one area I did feel compelled to pop in. This is it's like, I liken it to child rearing. When we set a consequence, in the middle of the grocery store, I have a full cart and my kid has a fit. And I say, if you do it again, we're leaving the store. And he does it again, and I don't leave the store. Well, he's going to keep doing it. So I have to leave the full grocery cart in the middle of the aisle and walk out of the store with a very upset child, right? And same thing, adult relationships can be similar. And it's really hard. And I've had this happen recently in my own personal life. And I just held to the boundary, and I was holding to my limit. I thank you for that, Greg, tonight, because I actually discovered that tonight. I need to set a boundary that is before my limit. That will lessen frustration. So thank you. But
You
I
are
do,
welcome.
I'm going to chime in and give everybody permission to say it's okay, and we don't have to feel guilty for having boundaries, for holding ourselves sacred.
I feel like
So
it's easy for us to see that in the kid example, right? We all know that we're just setting the stage to continue it with our parenting, but we're so much more reluctant to see the consequence that we're conditioning folks to keep pushing that boundary when we're
well, it's
talking
because
about peers or family.
we want our friends, we want our families, we want our support. And what we fail to recognize is sometimes support isn't always supportive.
So, so good, Kat. That was so good. Uh-huh.
So,
Is it the
and
support that we want? Is it the support that we actually need? Is it functional for us?
is it functional? And we get conditioned to accept minimal. And we don't necessarily have the permission to require and demand a level that actually serves who we are as people. And I think that especially as we go down these roads and we're all dealing with distress, it becomes easy to accept whatever anybody will offer.
Yep.
It doesn't always help. Sometimes it hurts. It can take energy. that's needed elsewhere. So I just am trying, I just was like, oh, that one hit. I just wanted to share, like, oh, permission to, oh, ask for better.
Better. When you said that, Kat, about like just owning our sacredness, I got chills. Like that's like, am I worth it? If I hold myself in that frame or that lens of sacredness, what would I do differently? What would I ask for differently? What would not be accepting of?
If I cared for me like I care for the other people in my life,
Mm,
what would that feel like?
mm, mm. Yeah, it's good. We have that I again, low risk example here is just from familiarity with being with families. It's just like I've heard times where it's like if someone else drops off another lasagna tray, I don't know what I'm going to do with it anymore. Like another casserole? Are you serious? Like, and I'm like, what boundary did you set? Did you tell them what you want? Did you tell them that you're a vegetarian? Like, people just bring in food just because this is our support. This is what we're doing. It's like that's actually not helpful at all. I don't want any of this. And now I'm left taking care of it and having to say, thank you.
I
Oh,
have
thank you so
14-year-old
much.
baked ziti.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
I
Kidding.
feel like I'm the exception of cancer moms because we maybe got one lasagna in all of treatment, right? We had amazing cooks, so much variety in the meals that came to us. But if I got a lasagna every night, yeah, I would appreciate the intent, but not want to eat lasagna every night.
Oh, thank you. And that's a boundary you set for what it is that you want, and also then respecting the person and the effort that they want to show up in. You're giving them a clear ask, a clear understanding of what's needed or what's wanted by you, and that may feel good for them as well.
Yeah, I think that respecting what someone wants to give is part of why we want to be pleasing people, right? And um, I think that ties in a little bit with another question that we have here: hard time setting boundaries, because uh, maybe a person we're in a relationship with never sets any of their own, and it's kind of become this expectation that you're always giving, um, always sacrificing self, not looking out for yourself, right? Um, so when you set the boundary with these sorts of giving people, it feels like a rejection. It feels like
Yeah.
hurtful. Um, I would love to hear from you, Greg, how when we recognize like such good intentions, but need to still set boundaries, how we can respect and really love on that wannabe supporter in the instead of conversations that we think are not going to be helpful relationships, the ones that we really want to maintain and nurture, how do we do that when we don't have an agreement on boundaries? How do we
Yeah.
navigate those conversations?
I'm gonna reference that ocean model again and really zone in on that C for compassion. And so I hear some of this is like the reason why that compassion effort is so high up on the list is because we want to honor that effort that somebody's making and show compassion for what they're doing or they're experiencing and really recognize that effort and at the same time still wanting to get your thoughts in there. So the compassion part of that begins to soften the experience in some way. It allows them to be seen by you and their efforts. And then you're able to then take that connection you've created and seeing them and their effort and seeing and offering them compassion around that experience. Like I know you may not know what else to do but make lasagna. And I recognize you love making lasagna. And that's really the way in which you just want to feed. You want to feed, you want to give. And I recognize that's important to you. My experience is that we have a lot of lasagna, right? Like, again, low risk that I'm using here. Yet you're starting with compassion to soften. And then from that experience of connection, you then move into a bigger dialogue in terms of making some things known um, or even recognizing for people that I know boundaries is something that's really maybe hard for you to hold or that that's not something that you practice very often. And I get that comes at a cost to you. And I feel for that. And so I'm looking to really set boundaries for myself. And one thing that I did is when I began looking at this course and really thinking a lot about boundaries, I started sharing more and more with people in my own life, just that example with my parents, and starting to let people hear from me about my journey and around boundaries and how that is. And I started having people send me funny memes and things that were supportive of boundaries. So it's like I started enrolling people simply in the talking that I'm doing this right now. I'm thinking about boundaries more often. And that became a way in for other people to say, like, I'm terrible at boundaries. I don't know what do you mean? Like, it's like, great, let's talk about it. So it became an opportunity, is what I'm offering to you. So share with people that you took a webinar tonight and you talked about boundaries and, hey, proactive, responsive, like, see and try on with your relationships what that's like.
Do you
Time for
find that
one more
setting
question.
setting your own boundaries helps others
Oh,
establish boundaries of their own? Because I think
yeah.
in those situations with those people, by sharing yours, you give them permission to then establish boundaries of their own that maybe
Yeah.
they wanted to, they just didn't know how.
Exactly. That modeling of behavior, that modeling for people, and I'm appreciating so much the word you're using, permission. You're offering it to other people. Like, you can say no to me, and we'll still be okay. If that's your boundary, that's cool. Like, let's have a relationship that allows for that. What would that be like? We're both relating to each other. We're moving more into that space. And it is like inviting more people to say what they want and begin to bring that to the table. Great. Let's talk about that. So you are like opening the door, and that's why I think like using the B word more often gives people that ability to say, what boundary do I want to create around this, or what boundary do I want to set tonight? And I find it to be really empowering for people to be in allowing that to be part of their everyday.
I feel like boundaries actually provide for an opportunity for safe feeling relationships.
Yeah. You know where you stand and what's okay, what's not. Absolutely. I know we're running out of time. I see
I
one
love that
last
question.
question
I see
that's
it.
come in.
I was thinking
Um,
about this. I was thinking about this too. So this is great.
I have to share the night that my daughter was diagnosed, she had ALL. We began treatment right away. If you're familiar with that, it was like a whirlwind, right? And the right after my husband and I finished signing all of the consents for the chemo that they had just started running, my daughter's primary attending like looked us like right in the eye and said, I just want you to keep in mind that there's going to be another side of this, and you need to parent in such a way that you haven't created a monster. She doesn't get to rule the roost just because she's the sick kid. And as he was saying this to me, I was like, what are you saying this for? Right? Like, my was just diagnosed with cancer this morning. I just signed like 8 million consents about what I know is going to happen to her because, or could happen because of the treatment. And you're talking to me about my parenting skills. And in hindsight, of course, it was so wise and he was so right, because our heart goes out to our kids, right? This is not what we wanted for them. We want to make things easier. We want to fix the things that we can. So here's the question that just came in. What do we do if we need to set the boundaries with our cancer child after all they've been through? How do we look in the mirror after we say no? I know some things that I've been working through over the years, but Greg, I would love to hear from a professional. What's
Well,
the right answer for that? Because I'm not
oh,
sure that
Well,
my
that's
actions
loaded.
are it.
I know. No
No
pressure.
pressure.
Bad internet connection. I'm sorry, I have to go.
We are down to
uh,
just 2 minutes, so
yeah, it's all no. The question was something that was floating in my mind as well, especially given our community here, and getting to see it. And I think I got excited and did a fist pump for that provider that was able to say that to you, Layla. That highlighted one thing for us, which is there's life after this experience in the best case scenarios, and we want to ensure for that. And I think setting boundaries says, I believe in this and your growth and experience. And I want to plan for that, because boundaries are going to be something that you're going to need to manage your own way of being in the world. And so is it easy? It's not. It's definitely not. And what I can say is, for those of us that begin to have some of this language or understanding around how to talk about boundaries, we start modeling that for them in the same way we talked about it just a moment ago in that permission. And we can have conversations around why a boundary is being set. Like, it's not just a no, it's a no with some reasoning behind it. Because if you as a parent think that that is the actual heck yes answer, is like, oh no, this is what I need to say, then I ask or invite you to say, like, how and what language that they're able to understand, depending upon their age, how can you get that message across from a place that it's for something that's important, it's for safety, it's for their well-being, it's for who they'll become. And beginning to kind of speak to some of that in a language they understand invites like a different part of the relationship. So I think like that's one of the things I get to steward small people in my world. I have nieces and nephews that I get to steward, and I think that is something I feel a lot of pride around. And so just recently got to experience a little vacation with them, and there was some boundaries that needed to be set throughout that vacation. Even Disney required some boundaries that was needed, and there we were doing that work. Was it easy? No, because they're in that scenario, right? We're on vacation. We don't have boundaries. I want to eat all the ice cream I want, right? Different than our experience is what we're talking to here, and still was something I needed to negotiate with and to talk about. I moved to say one other thing in this space is that idea that hit me was after everything they've gone through. Like that phrasing, I think that we have some of our stuff wrapped up in that phrasing too. If like everything they've gone through, and it becomes sort of either what we're projecting onto that experience for them, or what we know they've lost out on, and maybe they don't know they've lost out on. And so that's a loaded phrase for me. It's like, after everything they've gone through, how can I say no now? And that may be more about our stuff in relationship to that than that idea of my child, regardless of diagnosis, they need this boundary for a reason that I know is important, and I want to ensure, if like, how can I enroll them in that without this bias or this lens of after everything they've gone through. And I get it, and I'm not saying that's a bad phrase. I'm saying, where is it coming from, and is that giving us permission to do or not do something in that way?
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're
Really
welcome.
good. That's a tough question. That one's a hard one. My kiddo was between 2 and 7 all the way through the hard treatment time. And those are hard ages to set boundaries. But I have to admit, the boundaries were like a safe place for me, because I was like, I'm setting these boundaries as though I'm raising a child who's going to be a member of society that's going to have to be able to learn and understand boundaries. And I looked at it as a positive, like I'm saying no to him like I would to my other children.
Right. Who will
Because I
have that
want the
other
same
side?
outcome for him that I do.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking for. I'm putting that out in the world.
Right.
So man, is it hard. It's like, you want to just like give him a lollipop. All the lollipops.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, to all of our
great.
attendees tonight, thank you so much for being here with us. We hope we'll see you back in March. Stay tuned for more details. And to Greg, on behalf of all of our attendees and Momcology as an organization, we are so grateful for having had this time with you tonight. So I hope you're seeing all the applause and hearts reactions that you're getting.
Received and appreciated, and always thank you to Momcology for allowing me a space to come in and support and to do the good work. And so I thank you so much for that, and appreciate all of you who showed up for you. This was an investment in yourself, and I think that alone, you set a boundary in order to be here, to make you feel important and to receive. And for that, I want to say yay.
Yay. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in
March 18th.
March 18th, 2 months from now.
Thank you. All right. Have